The blazing Arizona sun had just crested over the distant mesas when Clara Summers first laid eyes on the massive black stallion that would change her life forever. Blood pounded in her ears as the beast reared up, hooves slashing the air like deadly weapons. The memory of her parents' deaths beneath the trampling feet of stampeding horses flooded back, and Clara stumbled backward, her throat closing with terror. "You will ride him," her Uncle Elijah barked, his weathered face twisted with impatience. "No niece of mine is going to live on my ranch and be afraid of horses. This nonsense has gone on long enough." It was 1878, and at 20 years old, Clara had come west after losing everything in Boston, her parents, their modest home, and any semblance of security. Uncle Elijah's cattle ranch outside Tucson had been her only option. The problem. Clara had developed an overwhelming fear of horses after witnessing her parents' carriage accident 3 years prior. Now, living on a ranch without riding was like trying to swim without getting wet. "I can't," Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she backed away from the snorting stallion. "Please, Uncle Elijah, I'll do anything else, cook, clean, mend, just don't make me—" "Enough!" Elijah grabbed her arm roughly. "The Summers family isn't known for cowardice. Your father would be ashamed." Clara flinched at the mention of her father. Her uncle didn't understand that her fear wasn't a choice, it was a prison she desperately wanted to escape. "Mr. Summers." The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. Both Clara and her uncle turned to see a tall figure approaching from the barn. The morning sun cast him in silhouette at first, but as he drew closer, Clara could make out broad shoulders, a lean frame, and a face that seemed carved from the same rugged landscape surrounding them. "Your new ranch hand's here," called Elijah's foreman from across the yard. The stranger removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. He nodded respectfully to Elijah before his gaze shifted to Clara, lingering just long enough for heat to rise in her cheeks. "Tucker Grayson," he introduced himself, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "Reporting for work, sir?" Elijah grunted. "Good timing, Grayson. Maybe you can talk some sense into my niece, afraid of horses if you can believe it." Tucker's eyes flicked back to Clara, and she saw something unexpected there, not the mockery or exasperation she'd grown accustomed to, but something that looked surprisingly like understanding. "Sir," Tucker said, turning back to Elijah, "I don't believe forcing a frightened rider onto a horse ever did much good for either of them." Elijah's face reddened. "This is my ranch, Grayson. My niece." "Yes, sir," Tucker acknowledged with a nod. His eyes found Clara's again as he added, "But she'll ride when she's ready, not before." The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt something shift inside her chest, not the familiar cold grip of fear, but a warm flicker of something like hope. Elijah's jaw tightened. "I hired you to break horses, Grayson, not to tell me how to handle my family." "Actually," Tucker replied, his tone respectful but firm, "you hired me because I know horses better than most, and I'm telling you this stallion isn't right for a beginner, especially one with fear." He gestured toward the black horse, still stamping and snorting. "He's barely green broke himself. You want your niece trampled?" Clara shuddered at the word, and Tucker noticed. Something in his expression softened. "Give me a week with Miss Summers," he said, turning back to Elijah. "If she's not sitting a gentle mare by then, I'll work a month without pay." Elijah looked between them, his frustration evident. Finally, he threw up his hands. "Fine, 1 week. but she learns to ride or you're both out." With that, he stormed off toward the main house, leaving Clara alone with the mysterious new ranch hand who had just stood up for her. "Thank you," Clara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Tucker settled his hat back on his head. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Summers. We've got work to do." "Clara," she corrected him. "Please call me Clara." He studied her for a moment before a slight smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Clara, then." He gestured toward the corral where the black stallion had now settled somewhat. "That's Thunder. He's a fine animal, but your uncle's wrong to start you on him." Clara swallowed hard, trying to keep her fear from showing. "I appreciate your offer to help, Mr. Grayson, but I'm not sure." "Tucker," he interrupted, "and I didn't offer to help. I made a promise to your uncle that you'd be riding within a week." His eyes held hers. "I don't break promises." "I'm not sure that's a promise you can keep," Clara admitted. "I've been afraid of horses since—" She trailed off, unwilling to revisit the memory. Tucker was quiet for a moment. "Fear's nothing to be ashamed of. It's the body's way of keeping us alive." He started walking toward the barn, gesturing for her to follow. "But sometimes our bodies get it wrong, think something's dangerous when it's not." Clara fell into step beside him, drawn by his confident manner and the first real understanding she'd encountered since arriving at the ranch. "Tomorrow morning," Tucker continued, "dawn. Meet me at the small corral behind the barn." He stopped and turned to face her. "Wear trousers if you got them. Easier than riding in skirts." Clara blinked in surprise. Ladies didn't wear trousers in Boston, but she'd noticed that Western women sometimes adopted more practical attire for ranch work. "I don't have— ask Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper. She'll help you sort something out." Tucker tipped his hat. "Dawn, Clara, don't be late." As he walked away, Clara realized she was more intrigued than frightened by the prospect of tomorrow's lesson. There was something about Tucker Grayson that made her want to be brave, something that made her think perhaps she could overcome the terror that had gripped her for so long. That night, Clara barely slept. Her dreams were filled with stampeding horses and her parents' screams, but occasionally a calm voice would cut through the chaos, a voice with a slight Texan drawl, telling her she would ride when she was ready. Dawn came too quickly. Clara, dressed in the borrowed trousers Mrs. Wilkins had provided, feeling awkward but determined as she made her way to the small corral behind the barn. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the world in soft grays and pinks. Tucker was already there, leaning against the fence, but what surprised Clara was that there wasn't a horse in sight. "Good morning," she said, trying to hide her confusion. Tucker straightened. "Morning." His eyes took in her attire with approval. "Those will work fine." Clara glanced around. "Where's the horse?" "We're not starting with a horse," Tucker replied, opening the gate to the corral and gesturing for her to enter. "We're starting with you." For the next hour, Tucker taught Clara about her own balance and center of gravity. He explained how a rider needed to be solid within themselves before they could connect with a horse. "A horse can feel your fear," he told her as he demonstrated how to ground her stance. "They're prey animals. When you're afraid, they think there's danger, and they react accordingly." Clara absorbed every word, finding comfort in understanding the logic behind her fear. When Tucker finally brought out a small chestnut mare named Penny, Clara's heart raced, but she didn't back away. "We're not riding today," Tucker assured her as he led the gentle horse into the corral. "Just meeting." He showed Clara how to approach slowly, how to let the horse smell her hand, how to speak softly and move deliberately. By the time the sun was fully up, Clara had touched Penny's neck briefly and with a trembling hand, but it was more than she'd voluntarily done in years. "Good work today," Tucker said as they led Penny back to her stall. "Tomorrow, same time." Each morning that week followed a similar pattern. Tucker would push Clara just to the edge of her comfort, then stop. He never forced, never ridiculed her hesitation, and always acknowledged her progress, no matter how small. By the fourth day, Clara was brushing Penny's coat while the mare contentedly munched on oats. By the fifth, she was leading the horse around the corral, her hands still shaking, but her determination growing. On the sixth morning, Tucker arrived with a saddle. "I can't," Clara said immediately, her throat tightening. Tucker set the saddle aside. "You don't have to," he said simply, "but I think you can." They spent that day with Clara just standing next to the saddled Penny, occasionally touching the leather, getting used to the idea. Tucker told her stories about his first horse, about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17 and making his way west to find work. Clara found herself sharing too about Boston, about the carriage accident, about how lost she felt coming to Arizona territory to live with an uncle she barely knew. "Seems we're both a long way from home," Tucker observed as they sat on the corral fence during a break. "I'm not sure I know where home is anymore," Clara admitted. Tucker's eyes met hers. "Home isn't always a place." Something in his gaze made Clara's heart beat faster, and not from fear this time. She looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. On the seventh day, the last day of Tucker's promised week, Clara arrived at the corral to find him waiting with Penny, saddled and ready. "Today?" she asked, her voice small. Tucker nodded. "Today. But only if you're ready." Clara took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to run, to hide in her room and never face another horse again. But another part, a part that had grown stronger over the past week, wanted to prove to herself that she could overcome this. "Show me," she said. With infinite patience, Tucker helped Clara put her foot in the stirrup. He supported her as she swung her other leg over, then stayed right beside her as Penny shifted under the new weight. Clara's heart pounded so hard she was certain the horse could feel it, but Penny remained calm, perhaps responding to Tucker's steady presence. "Breathe," Tucker reminded her. "You're doing fine." Clara gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, but she didn't ask to get down. They stood like that for nearly 10 minutes, Clara in the saddle, Tucker at her side until her breathing began to normalize. "Ready to try moving?" Tucker asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Tucker kept one hand on Penny's bridle and the other near Clara's leg as they took their first tentative steps around the corral. Clara was stiff with tension, but she stayed in the saddle. After one slow circuit, Tucker glanced up at her. "What do you think?" To her surprise, Clara found herself smiling. "I'm riding," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "I'm actually riding." The moment was interrupted by slow clapping from the corral gate. Uncle Elijah stood watching, his expression unreadable. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Grayson actually delivered." Clara felt Tucker's hand tighten slightly on Penny's bridle. "Your niece delivered, sir. All I did was give her time." Elijah studied them both. "Time's up, though. Week's over." He pushed open the gate. "I need you breaking those new Mustangs we brought in yesterday, Grayson. Clara's had her special attention, back to regular work now." Tucker nodded, his face returning to the professional mask he wore around the other ranch hands. Yes, sir. Clara felt a pang of disappointment as Tucker helped her dismount. Their morning lessons had become the highlight of her days, and not just because she was overcoming her fear. Thank you, she said quietly as her feet touched the ground. Tucker's eyes met hers. You're welcome, Clara. He hesitated, then added, You should practice a little each day. Penny's a good mount for you. With that, he tipped his hat and followed Elijah toward the main corral, leaving Clara with the sense that something important was slipping away before it had properly begun. Over the next few weeks, Clara continued to ride Penny each morning. She gradually grew more comfortable in the saddle, though she still avoided the larger, more spirited horses that dominated her uncle's ranch. She caught glimpses of Tucker working with the wild mustangs, his skill evident in the way the animals responded to him. Sometimes he would tip his hat to her as they passed each other, or offer a quick word of encouragement about her riding progress, but their easy conversations of that first week seemed to have vanished. Clara told herself it was natural he had been assigned to help her, and now that task was complete. Yet she couldn't help but notice how her heart quickened whenever he was near. Early one morning, nearly a month after her first ride, Clara was returning from a solitary ride when she heard shouting from the main corral. She guided Penny toward the commotion and saw a crowd gathered around the fence. In the center of the corral stood Tucker, face to face with the black stallion that had terrified Clara on her first day at the ranch. Thunder was still wild-eyed and dangerous, but Tucker moved around him with careful confidence. That one's devil-touched, muttered a ranch hand standing near Clara. Thrown 3 men already this morning. Boss says if Grayson can't break him, we're putting him down. Clara's stomach clenched at the thought. She'd come to understand that horses weren't the monsters her fear had painted them to be. Even one as spirited as Thunder deserved better than to be destroyed for his wildness. She watched as Tucker spoke softly to the stallion, moving slowly closer until he could touch the animal's neck. The entire yard fell silent as Tucker carefully, methodically, gained the horse's trust enough to slip a bridle over his head. When Tucker finally swung up into the saddle, Thunder exploded into action. The stallion bucked and spun, but Tucker moved with him, his body in perfect harmony with the horse's attempts to dislodge him. Clara found herself holding her breath, both terrified and mesmerized by the display. After what seemed like an eternity, Thunder began to tire. His bucks became less violent, his turns less sharp, until finally he slowed to a trot around the corral with Tucker still firmly in the saddle. A cheer went up from the assembled ranch hands. Clara released her breath, a smile spreading across her face. As Tucker guided Thunder toward the gate, his eyes met hers over the heads of the crowd. Something passed between them, a moment of shared understanding that made Clara's cheeks flush. That evening, as Clara was returning from helping Mrs. Wilkins with dinner preparations, she spotted Tucker sitting alone on the corral fence, watching the sunset. Before she could think better of it, she changed direction and approached him. "That was impressive this morning," she said, stopping a few feet away. Tucker turned, surprise flickering across his features before a smile took its place. "Just doing my job." "No," Clara shook her head. "It was more than that. You saved Thunder's life." Tucker looked out at the horses grazing in the evening light. "He's a good horse. Just needed someone to understand him." Clara moved closer, gathering her courage. "Like you understood me." Tucker's eyes returned to hers, and Clara saw something there that made her heart skip. "You were easier to understand than Thunder," he said softly. "And a sight prettier, too." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. No one had ever called her pretty before, not in Boston, where her serious nature and preference for books over balls had marked her as plain, and certainly not here on the ranch, where she'd been viewed primarily as Elijah's troublesome niece. "I've missed our morning talks," she admitted. Tucker's expression softened. "So have I." "Perhaps," Clara began, but was interrupted by her uncle's voice calling her name from the main house. "Clara, got visitors asking after you." Clara sighed. "I should go." Tucker nodded, but as she turned to leave, he called after her. "Tomorrow morning? The small corral? I could help you work on your trot." Clara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Dawn," she confirmed. "I won't be late." When Clara reached the house, she was surprised to find two well-dressed visitors from Tucson, a lawyer named Mr. Peterson and his wife. They had known her parents in Boston years ago and had only just learned of Clara's presence in Arizona territory. "Your father was a good man," Mr. Peterson said as they sat in Uncle Elijah's rarely used parlor. "When we heard about his passing and then discovered his daughter was living out here." He exchanged a glance with his wife. "Well, we wanted to offer you a position in our home, Miss Summers." Clara blinked in surprise. "A position?" Mrs. Peterson leaned forward. "Our children need a governess. You're educated, from a good family. You'd have your own room in our home in Tucson, proper society." Her eyes took in the simple ranch house. "It would be more suitable for a young lady of your background." Clara was speechless. A month ago, such an offer would have seemed like salvation, a chance to escape the ranch, the horses, her uncle's disapproval. Now she found herself hesitating. "It's very kind of you," she began. "She'll take it," Uncle Elijah interrupted from his position by the fireplace. "Girl doesn't belong on a ranch. Never did." Clara turned to him, hurt by his casual dismissal, despite their improved relationship over the past month. I'll need to consider it," she said carefully. The Petersons nodded understandingly, but Elijah scowled. After they left, promising to return in 3 days for her answer, Elijah confronted her. "There's nothing to consider," he said gruffly. "This is your chance to return to civilized society. Take it." "But I'm just beginning to find my place here," Clara protested. "I can ride now. I'm learning about the ranch." Elijah shook his head. "You're a city girl, Clara. Always will be." His expression hardened. "And I've seen how you look at Grayson." Clara felt her face heat. "I don't know what you mean." "He's a drifter," Elijah continued. "Moves from ranch to ranch. Men like that don't settle, and they sure don't make honest women out of Eastern ladies." He sighed, his voice softening slightly. "Your father sent you to me to look after you, not to watch you throw yourself away on a cowboy with nothing to his name." His words stung, partly because Clara hadn't fully acknowledged her feelings for Tucker to herself, and partly because she feared there might be truth in what her uncle said. What did she really know about Tucker Grayson, beyond his way with horses and his kind eyes? That night, Clara barely slept. Her mind churned with conflicting desires, the security of the Petersons' offer versus the uncertainty of staying at the ranch, the propriety of her Boston upbringing versus the freedom she'd begun to taste in Arizona. And through it all, Tucker's face kept appearing in her thoughts. Dawn found her at the small corral as promised, but her troubled mind must have shown on her face, for Tucker took one look at her and frowned. "Something wrong?" he asked as he helped her saddle Penny. Clara hesitated, then told him about the Petersons' offer. Tucker listened quietly, his expression unreadable as he adjusted Penny's cinch. Sounds like a good opportunity, he said finally, not meeting her eyes. Tucson's a growing place, more suitable for a lady than a dusty ranch. His response wasn't what Clara had hoped for, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. Perhaps some indication that he would miss her if she left. Some reason to stay? Yes, I suppose it is, she replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Their lesson that morning lacked the easy camaraderie of previous sessions. Tucker was professional, helpful as always, but distant in a way Clara couldn't quite define. When they finished, he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. "Thank you for the lesson," Clara said formally. Tucker nodded, his eyes finally meeting hers. "Clara," he began, then stopped. Something shifted in his expression. "You've come a long way with your writing. You should be proud." It wasn't what he'd started to say. Clara was certain of that, but she forced a smile. "Thanks to you." As she turned to lead Penny back to the stable, Tucker called after her, "When do you leave for Tucson?" Clara looked back at him. "I haven't decided yet. The Petersons return in 3 days for my answer." Tucker's face remained carefully neutral. "Well, good luck with whatever you choose." As Clara walked away, she couldn't help feeling that something important had just slipped through her fingers. The next 2 days passed in a blur of indecision. Clara continued her routine on the ranch, helping Mrs. Wilkins, riding Penny each morning, but her heart wasn't in it. Tucker seemed to be avoiding her. Taking his meals at odd hours and working with the most distant herds. On the evening before the Petersons were due to return, Clara was sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset and still no closer to a decision when she heard hoofbeats approaching at speed. One of the ranch hands, covered in dust and looking grim, reined in sharply by the house. "Where's the boss?" he called to Clara. "Inside," she replied, rising as she sensed trouble. "What's wrong?" "Stampede up north," the hand said as Uncle Elijah appeared in the doorway. "Lightning spooked the herd. They're heading for the ravine." Elijah swore. "Round up whoever's here. We need to turn them." "Grayson's already up there with a few men," the hand reported. "Sent me for reinforcements." Clara's heart clenched at the mention of Tucker's name. She knew enough about ranching now to understand the danger cattle blindly rushing toward a ravine could mean massive losses for her uncle and serious danger for the men trying to turn them. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "I want to help." Elijah shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. This isn't work for I can ride now," Clara interrupted. "You're short-handed, and I know the northern pastures from my morning rides." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm going." Something in her tone must have convinced her uncle, for after a moment's hesitation, he nodded curtly. "Stay with Johnson here, do exactly as he says, and if things get dangerous, you ride clear. Understood?" Clara nodded, already hurrying to the stable to saddle Penny. The ride north was tense, with Clara following Johnson and 3 other hands at a pace that would have terrified her a month ago. They could hear the stampede before they saw it, a rumbling like distant thunder that grew louder as they crested a ridge. The sight below took Clara's breath away. Hundreds of cattle were moving as one massive force across the landscape, dust billowing around them. A handful of riders darted around the edges of the herd, trying to turn the leaders away from the ravine that lay about a half-mile ahead. Clara recognized Tucker immediately. He was riding Thunder, the powerful black stallion moving with incredible speed as Tucker worked to get ahead of the stampede. "Johnson, take the south flank," called Elijah as they plunged down the ridge. "Clara, stay back." But Clara had spotted trouble. One of the riders had fallen, his horse having stumbled in a prairie dog hole. He was on foot now, desperately trying to reach safe ground as the cattle thundered toward him. Without thinking, Clara urged Penny forward, angling toward the fallen rider. She heard her uncle shouting, but the roar of the stampede drowned out his words. All her focus was on reaching the man before the cattle did. Penny responded to Clara's urgency, galloping faster than they'd ever gone in practice. Clara leaned low over the mare's neck, her fear forgotten in the rush of purpose. She reached the fallen rider just seconds before the leading edge of cattle would have. The man looked up in surprise as she extended her hand. "Get on!" she shouted. He grabbed her arm, using her leverage to swing up behind her. Penny staggered slightly under the double weight, but recovered admirably. "Hang on!" Clara called, turning the horse away from the oncoming cattle and spurring her toward safety. They barely made it. Clara could feel the ground shaking beneath them as Penny carried them clear of the stampede's path. When they reached a safe distance, Clara reined in, her heart pounding with exhilaration rather than fear. "That was some riding, Miss Summers," the ranch hand said as he slipped down from behind her. "Never expected to owe my life to the boss's horse-shy niece." Clara couldn't help but smile, the thrill of what she'd accomplished washing over her. She had ridden into danger, real danger, without hesitation. The fear that had ruled her life for years had taken a back seat to something stronger. Her momentary triumph was short-lived, however. Looking back at the stampede, she saw that the situation was growing more desperate. The cattle were getting closer to the ravine, and the riders couldn't seem to turn them. Then she spotted Tucker again. He had somehow gotten ahead of the herd and was now directly in their path. Thunder standing firm as Tucker waved his hat and shouted, trying to turn the leaders. It was incredibly dangerous if the cattle didn't turn. Both horse and rider would be trampled. Clara held her breath as the lead cattle bore down on Tucker. For a terrifying moment, it seemed they wouldn't turn. Then, at the last possible second, the leaders veered away from Tucker and Thunder's imposing presence. The rest of the herd followed, their direction shifting just enough to parallel the ravine instead of plunging into it. A cheer went up from the other riders as they worked to further slow and contain the cattle now that the immediate danger had passed. Clara let out the breath she'd been holding, relief washing over her. As the dust settled and the cattle were brought under control, Clara looked for Tucker. She spotted him dismounting from Thunder, checking the stallion for any injuries. Without thinking, she guided Penny in his direction. Tucker looked up as she approached, surprise and something else admiration, crossing his face. "Johnson told me what you did," he said as Clara dismounted. "That was brave, Clara." "I wasn't thinking about being brave," she admitted. "I just saw he needed help and acted." She gestured toward where Tucker had stood down the stampede. "Kinda like what you did." A small smile touched Tucker's lips. "Difference is, I've been doing this for years. You faced down your worst fear today." Clara hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. She had ridden into danger, into a situation that embodied the very thing that had terrified her for so long, and she had done it without hesitation. "I guess I did," she said softly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, with dust settling around them and the last rays of sunlight painting the landscape gold, Clara knew she couldn't leave for Tucson. Whatever uncertainty the future held, her place was here not because of the ranch, but because of the man standing before her. Before either could speak again, Uncle Elijah rode up, his expression a mixture of anger and relief. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, though there was less heat in his words than Clara expected. You could have been killed. She saved Martinez, Tucker interjected, rode straight into the herd's path to get him, never seen anything like it. Elijah looked between them, his gaze lingering on Tucker longer than necessary. Finally, he sighed. We'll talk about this at home. He turned his horse. Round up the stragglers and let's head back. It'll be dark soon. As he rode away, Clara turned back to Tucker. I'm not going to Tucson, she said simply. Tucker's expression remained carefully neutral. Your uncle might have other ideas after today. I don't care, Clara replied, surprising herself with her own certainty. This is where I belong now. Tucker studied her face. Because you can ride now? Because you're not afraid anymore? Clara shook her head. No, because... She hesitated, then gathered her courage. Because you're here. The admission hung between them, Clara's heart pounding as she waited for his response. For a long moment, Tucker was silent, his eyes never leaving hers. Then slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance between them. One hand came up to gently touch her cheek, and Clara leaned into the contact, her eyes never leaving his. I've wanted to do this since that first day, Tucker murmured, and then his lips were on hers, gentle but certain. The kiss was everything Clara had never known to want tender and strong, like Tucker himself. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I thought I was going to lose you to Tucson, he admitted. Clara smiled. I don't think I was ever really going. I just needed a reason to stay. Tucker kissed her again, briefly this time. We should get back before your uncle comes looking. The ride back to the ranch was filled with stolen glances and tentative smiles. Clara knew there would be challenges ahead, her uncle's disapproval, the uncertain future, the hardships of ranch life. But for the first time since arriving in Arizona, she felt truly hopeful. That night, after a tense but surprisingly non-confrontational conversation with her uncle, Clara slipped out to the porch to find Tucker waiting. They sat together on the steps, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, his childhood in Texas, her life in Boston, their shared love of quiet dawns and open spaces. What made you stand up to my uncle that first day? Clara asked, genuinely curious. You'd just been hired. You could have lost your job. Tucker was quiet for a moment. My mother was thrown from a horse when I was young, he finally said. Broke her arm. My father tried to force her back into the saddle the next day, said she needed to get over her fear. His jaw tightened at the memory. She wasn't ready. The horse sensed it, spooked and threw her again. Broke her back that time. Clara's hand found his in the darkness. I'm so sorry. She lived, Tucker continued, but never walked right again, and she never rode another horse. He turned to face Clara. When I saw your uncle trying to force you onto Thunder, all I could think was that fear doesn't work that way. You can't bully it into submission. You have to respect it. Work with it. Like breaking a wild horse, Clara murmured. Tucker smiled slightly. Something like that, though I prefer to think of it as gentling, not breaking. The next morning, Clara met the Petersons with a serene confidence. I'm grateful for your kind offer, she told them, but my place is here. Mrs. Peterson looked disappointed but unsurprised. Are you certain, my dear? The life of a rancher's wife is not easy. Clara blinked, startled by the assumption, but before she could correct it, Uncle Elijah spoke up from behind her. Grayson's asked to court her proper, he said gruffly. Man came to me this morning, talking about intentions and futures. He shook his head, but Clara detected a hint of approval beneath his gruff exterior. Seems the girls made her choice. As the Petersons took their leave, Clara turned to her uncle in surprise. "Tucker spoke to you? This morning?" Elijah nodded. "Said he wouldn't have a lady's reputation compromised, even out here." He studied her face. "He's still a drifter without much to his name, Clara." "He has a name," Clara replied firmly. "Grayson, and it's a good one." Her uncle sighed. "Well, at least he knows horses, and he did save half the herd yesterday." He turned to go back inside, then paused. "Your father would have liked him, I think." It was as close to a blessing as Clara was likely to get, and she accepted it with a grateful smile. Tucker was waiting by the corral when she found him later, his expression uncertain until he saw her smile. "I hear you've been making declarations to my uncle," Clara said as she approached. Tucker's cheeks colored slightly, but he didn't look away. "Seemed the right thing to do." "Very proper of you, Mr. Grayson," Clara teased. "I can be proper when it matters," he replied, taking a step closer. "And you matter, Clara Summers." 6 months passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy. Clara's riding improved daily, and by winter she was helping with the cattle drives, her fear of horses a distant memory. Tucker proved himself invaluable to the ranch, his skill with horses bringing buyers from as far as California to purchase Summers' trained stock. Uncle Elijah, seeing the positive changes Tucker brought to both his niece and his ranch, offered him a partnership in the horse breaking side of the business. Grayson Horse Training became known throughout the territory for producing well-mannered, reliable mounts. On a crisp December evening, Tucker took Clara riding to a mesa overlooking the ranch. As the sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in spectacular golds and purples, he dropped to one knee. "I don't have much to offer except hard work and a heart that's entirely yours," he said, holding out a simple silver ring. "But I promise you this, Clara Summers, you will never face your fears alone, as long as I'm by your side." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, 1,000 times, yes. They were married in the spring of 1879, in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Wilkins cried, Uncle Elijah gave the bride away with gruff affection, and even Thunder, now Tucker's inseparable partner, was adorned with a special bridle for the occasion. After the ceremony, Tucker helped Clara mount Penny, then swung up onto Thunder beside her. "Ready to ride into the sunset, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked with a smile. Clara leaned over to kiss him. No longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the ranch a year before. "I'm ready for anything," she replied, "as long as we ride together." Years later, visitors to the Grayson Horse Ranch would often hear the story of how the operation began with a frightened Eastern lady, a patient Texas cowboy, and the wisdom to understand that some things, like trust and love, couldn't be forced but had to be earned in their own time. Clara and Tucker's reputation for gentle horse training spread throughout the West. Ranchers brought their most difficult cases, knowing the Graysons had a special touch, particularly with horses that had been mistreated or traumatized. "Horse or human," Tucker would often say, "they ride when they're ready, not before." And Clara, watching her husband work with a nervous mare or their young daughter taking her first tentative ride on a gentle pony, would smile and know that some fears were worth facing, especially when the reward was a love that had carried them through drought and plenty, hardship and joy, always side by side, always moving forward together.